Hey friends, it's me, Keshav, aka Durosai, and today I'm going to be giving some tips on how to mix your sub bass if you don't have a subwoofer. Now, these techniques are still applicable even if you do have a subwoofer, just to get a better mix in your low frequencies. So, most bedroom producers are in this situation, so I thought I'd give some techniques to work around this problem. So, this brings me to tip number one, and that is putting your ear right up to the port of your studio monitor. So if you got, 5, 6 inch monitors, chances are that they're rolling off at around 50, 60 hertz. Even with 8 inch monitors, they're still probably rolling off around 40, 45 hertz. So you're missing a good octave or two of low frequencies. But what the port does, it extends the low frequency response even lower. So that's why, manufacturers even put the port there in the first place. You get a better bass response. But even with the port at your mix position, you're still not hearing very low frequencies. But if you put your ear directly up to it, you're going to hear stuff that you've never heard before. Like I've heard, 30, sometimes even 20 hertz waves just by, having my ear that in that close proximity to the port, because the port is essentially like another sound source for bass. You can think of it like that. And so what this is going to tell you is pretty useful information, like whether your kick is interfering with your sub bass, or maybe if your bass is too boomy or loud, or if there's distortion. You're going to hear those things by using this technique. And this is something that I've used quite a bit. I mean, I have a subwoofer and I still use this. It gives a different sort of uh, a feel to listening to the bass, if that makes any sense. So tip number two is something that you might have already heard, but it can't be repeated enough, and that is using a reference track with a spectrum analyzer. So I like to use one called Voxengo Span. It's free and it's got a lot of cool features. So for one, the display is really nice, so you can view the frequency response very clearly. And two, it's got a lot of cool different modes for viewing that response in various ways. So it's got a high res mode, so it really it doesn't smooth out the frequency response. So you can really see where things are resonating, if there's any peaks. It's got a master mode, which smooths out the frequency response, showing you a more holistic, big picture, and a bunch of other cool ones too. And so what you can do is grab the track that you were working on and your reference, and you can compare both in the analyzer itself. And there's a really neat way to view both tracks on the same analyzer in different colors. So to do this in Ableton, what you're going to want to do is have your reference track and your track on two separate audio channels. Then you're going to want to route those two audio tracks to another pair of audio tracks and pan them 100% left and right. And then group them and make sure you have it set to in so you can hear the input on those tracks. Then put Voxengo on the group. So in Voxengo, make sure your input routing is set to A and B for the left and right channels. Go ahead and rename the in-channel labels and group names for 1 and 2. And then on your group assignments, you want to make sure you have groups 1 and 2, again set to the left and right corresponding channels. And then once you click your underlay to be turned on, you will see both tracks playing at the same time in different colors. So when you're comparing your reference track to your track, what you want to not do is just arbitrarily just compare the levels of the tracks, because the reference track, chances are, is going to be mixed and mastered already. So naturally it's going to be louder than your unmixed, unmastered track. So what you want to do is look at the relative levels of a frequency band in comparison to another frequency band. So for example, you want to say take your reference track and see where the bass is in comparison to the mids and the highs. So you might find that the bass is, say, 6 dB louder than the rest of the frequency range. So then you go into your track and see, all right, where is my bass in comparison to the mids and the highs? So maybe your bass is 10 dB below, so you're like, okay, I just need to lower this 4 dB. And so that way once you master your track, the mastering engineer just has to bump up the levels of your track to 0 dB, and then your track will be just as loud as the reference and also match it in the tonality. So the last tip number 3, is also something that just can't be said enough, and that is referencing your track on various systems. So whether that be your studio monitors, headphones, the car, AirPods, you name it, you should play your track through it. So the car test is one of my favorites, and I think it's extremely useful for 2 big reasons. One is that a majority of people listen to music in their car, so it's just a good idea to test your track through an environment where a lot of people are going to be listening to it in. And another thing is room acoustics. So in your room, when bass travels, it's going to bounce off the floors, the walls, the ceiling, and then constructively or destructively interfere with itself. And so what that does is create peaks and nulls in the bass response of your room. And so you might have noticed that walking around your room, there are places where the bass is super loud and boomy, and others where it's just really quiet or non-existent. And this is because of those peaks and troughs. But in a car, the bass is pretty much just going out the window. It's not really reflecting within the car. So a huge element of something that muddies up the frequency response in a room is taken away, which leads to a more accurate representation of the bass. So you can make better mix decisions. Even with my subwoofer, I still go to my car all the time just to kind of dial in some of the bass, because I might not be very trusting of the frequency response in my room. And there you have it. That is 3 ways on how to mix your sub bass without a subwoofer. I really hope this helped, and if it did, please leave a like and subscribe. Check out my releases in the links below. They're on Spotify, Soundcloud, and all major platforms. And have a good day. Peace.